We are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us this morning talking about teen suicide and depression. With us this morning, two guests from Vanderbilt that deal with this, pediatrician Dr. Greg Plemons, and we have Dr. Heather Keth, who deals with the emotion of it all. You're a medical doctor, and you deal with more the feelings that these
Yes.
kids deal with. And again, it was interesting when I sat down first, the range of young people they deal with. They can go back and start. This is the smaller number, of course, but up to 3 years of age is where maybe some of these children start, exhibiting some of the symptoms of, would you say, depression, or what would you call it?
A lot of the kids that we see, again, it's a much smaller number.
Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on that.
A lot of the kids that we see might be children who are on the autism spectrum, for example, and have some significant behavioral problems related to that. Certainly when we're talking about pretty intense depression, that is much more likely to be seen as we kind of get a little bit older into the age range. Anxiety, there's a lot of younger kids who struggle with anxiety and have pretty significant anxiety. School avoidance is often a symptom of anxiety, so tummy aches and headaches every day before school. I can't go to school. They sort of suddenly disappear during the day while they're home, and then the tummy ache and the headache reappears the next morning. And I think that's something a lot of pediatricians deal with in their office, having kiddos who are having these symptoms that disappear if they're not at school.
Okay, now are the symptoms made up? Are they psychosomatic and they really do have an upset tummy because they're so nervous and it goes away when they're not at school? Or are they making up excuses to get out of going to school?
I think that's really hard to sort out. I mean, I think we know that there are as many nerves in your gut as your brain, and kids seem to be much more sensitive to things that go on emotionally in their gut rather than you or I just get a headache, at the end of the day when we're stressed. But kids, it all manifests sometimes in the belly. So I think you have to take every complaint seriously.
All right, so when they do come, I wanted to touch some on this then, and we're going to put up throughout the program, though, the suicide prevention hotline number that's out there. When they do get to you then, you can treat them in a number of ways, the talking and the counseling and sorting through what they're dealing with, as well as medically, too. Some of these young people can be helped by some of these types of drugs that are available.
Yeah, I think it really depends on what diagnoses may come along with that suicide. So if they clinically have depression, there are medications out there that...
And define clinical then so we can know. Is a clinical depression one that just is there all the time? It's chronic? Or what, as opposed to, look, because we say again, we all get depressed. Where is that line where it becomes clinical and this person needs help?
I mean, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think so. We have in our diagnostic criteria when we're looking at diagnosing someone with like depression or anxiety, there's certain kind of check marks that you get for each of the symptoms. If it's disrupting functioning, so if somebody is like not going to school, not going to work because these symptoms are difficult, or they're having these periods of pretty intense depressive symptoms, or if we're talking about another disorder, symptoms that go along with that, then you're really talking about sort of a diagnosable clinical depression. And again, there's lots of criteria that we look at as doctors when we're making those diagnoses, but thinking about, is it disrupting someone's functioning? That is usually an indicator that you're in the realm of being able to be diagnosed with something.
And even the basic kind of things from day-to-day sleep. How are you sleeping? How are you eating? Are you performing as well in school?
Do you have energy to do things?
All right, so once you diagnose that, and it's clinical, and that's a good description you gave, so then how do you, alleviate that in terms of, the counseling and medical treatment, if that will help?
So there's lots of options for levels of care and kinds of treatment.
Like when they go into these beds, what do they do?
Well, and so one thing I think that's important is so we can think about, we call it levels of care with what we do. So we always want to match somebody with what we would call the least restrictive level of care. So how can we get you the help that you need in the least restrictive way? So if you kind of look at the whole spectrum, you've got once a week therapy. So a more traditional kind of go to a therapist's office for a 50-minute session kind of thing. We also have something called intensive outpatient programs, or IOPs, or partial hospitalization programs, and those are kind of what they sound like. So you are in the hospital or in an intensive treatment program for several hours during the day, but you don't sleep there. You go home at night, and there's some pretty fabulous programs here in Middle Tennessee that are partial hospital programs. So it offers intensive therapy, medication evaluation and management, and things like that, but you go home at night. And those are great options because it can often expose people to sort of the stressors they have in their life in the evenings, but then they return to a safe and supportive environment where they're getting that intensive therapy during the day. The next step up from that is inpatient psychiatric treatment. So that is when you are considered to be an immediate risk to yourself or someone else. So you are really not able to keep yourself safe. And in general, we want to think about inpatient hospitalizations as being on the short side because we can't live in a hospital. People are going to have to be able to get those skills and manage things in their own home environment because they're going to be returning to those same stressors and things that have that they've been dealing with. So we think about wanting that to be short term, and then we want to get people set up with the appropriate services and supports from an outpatient basis to do that. But the bottom line is that there are lots of evidence-based, fabulous kinds of therapy and treatments that can manage depression and anxiety and bipolar disorder and schizophrenia and all of these things. And so there is absolutely hope. So even though we're talking about a pretty bleak subject, and even though you know, we are obviously talking about this because suicide is there is an uptick in suicide. We know that from the data. There is hope, and I don't want anyone to not kind of think that they can reach out and they can get that support because you can feel better.
Okay, and what kind of meds will you give?
I am not a psychiatrist, but we work in conjunction with our psychiatry folks to help decide if there is a medication that would help. And so increasingly I think what we see is there's a small number of child psychiatrists in this state.
Yes.
Unfortunately, when you try to refer someone else, particularly out even within the metropolitan Nashville, we don't have a number of providers that we need. And so more and more primary care physicians, family practice doctors, pediatricians are prescribing these medicines in conjunction with someone perhaps. And we're trying to do more training actually for primary care folks because we just don't have the man.
Seroquel, Prozac, Orazepam.
Those are all
different medications.
Lithium, Elavil.
Those are all
my personal favorite, Thorazine. Just kidding.
Just
kidding about
these.
Thorazine, but those others. I'm just saying in small doses. But is the thinking, as opposed to an adult with a child, if you can, you want to try to deal with it without meds?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
The medicine is, often people are kind of looking for that magic pill.
Right.
And obviously I'm biased because I'm a feelings doctor, not a medical doctor, so I don't write prescriptions. But I think the evidence is there that shows that therapy is really, in most cases, going to be sort of the first line. Like, that's what we want to do. And then there's great evidence for if someone is not kind of responding as well as you would like to the therapy portion, having medication be an adjunct to that. So just another piece of it. So it's not that we want to say, like, you just need this pill and you're going to feel happy, because that's not what we're trying to do in the mental health profession. We are trying to give people the skills to deal with the symptoms that they have. And not have anyone sort of feel like there's this magic pill that's going to make everything be okay.
Okay, but we should say when they do need to be on meds, it's not like you're drugging someone up. No. What my take is, these pills, when they work, are to make you more how you should be normally and not feeling awful. Not drugging you, but getting you from, you're off base, this gets you back in line with who you really are. That's what it is. Do you guys ever deal with Middle Tennessee Mental Health over there on Stewart's Ferry and Donaldson?
Yeah, there's some really fabulous agencies in Middle Tennessee.
So that, I mean, I know that facility there. I mean, I deal with it from the point, because that's a lot of times where they send, you know, some of these inmates that have to do a psychological evaluation before they stand trial. But they stay there, so there's secure units there. But that's also, is that where there are beds, but there just aren't enough is there as well?
There are only adults, so MTMHI is only adults. So again, that's part of the problem. You have to have specific requirements to be licensed as a facility that treats children and adolescents. So there are more beds available for adults than there are for children and adolescents. We still don't rank well in the state of Tennessee overall, but there's certainly more access if you are over the age of 18.
Okay, so there is, that's good to know. You know, we were talking too about suicide, which we mentioned there, but I was just thinking that, you know, that's the worst case scenario, the outcome. But, you know, youngsters suffering from this, there's all kinds of much lesser than suicide, but devastating effects. Maybe someone who's suffering from this, who maybe is not even going to consider suicide, but is just not going to class, or all of a sudden just withdraws from friends and doesn't do anything, spends all his or her time on the phone, playing games by themselves, things like this. So, I mean, it's not just that you're worried about suicide as the extreme, of course, but there's a lot. It affects every aspect of your life, even short of suicide.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's, again, there is hope. There are people you can talk to. It doesn't have to be that you're on the end of thinking about suicide. You can feel better, even if we're talking about depression, anxiety that has not risen to that level.
Gotcha. Well, listen, we'll take a quick break. We'll come back with our final segment, maybe a call or two if they come in. It's a heavy topic. Maybe folks listening at home, but they're welcome to call in if you have a question. And we will also put up the suicide prevention hotline for you in the next segment, too. If you or you know of someone, we'll have that for you. We'll be right back.